Good evening, everybody. We're so happy to have you with us here on this beautiful spring evening. I'm Ruth Arisman with Susan Glassman. We're the co-presidents of Women's Voices Race for Social Justice. As always, we want to encourage you to visit Women's Voices website. There are many educational opportunities, programs in our book and movie club that you are able to participate in, and all of that information is there. There are also some opportunities for action, locally and federally. On the local level, our legislative session is winding up tomorrow. To my best knowledge, there are still bills pending that could greatly affect the voting rights and the ability of individuals in Missouri to exercise their right to vote. We have been following the whole Medicaid expansion issue very closely. And we were very distressed when the legislature did not include funding for that in the budget that they sent to Governor Parson. Governor Parson cannot add any money to the budget. He can veto money or with.
She froze.
Our Constitution, because the voters approved the constitutional change that the expansion should start in July of this year. So we're trying to send a very strong message to the governor that we're very disappointed in him breaking his promise. He told us that he would respect the will of the people. And I would like to invite everyone here to a rally tomorrow at noon at 3101 Shoto Avenue. That's the state office building that's just east of Grand. We hope you'll join us to send a very strong message to the governor that he should do the right thing, follow the will of the people, and expand Medicaid to help our uninsured neighbors. And finally, we ask you to please, if you're not a member of Women's Voices, please join us. We are only as strong as our members and the voices of our members. So we need each of you. By speaking out together and acting together, we can create positive social change that we can't create on our own. So please, if you're not a member, consider joining us and consider taking an active part in the work that we do. So we are very excited tonight about this timely presentation on immigration and the importance of immigration policy reform. We have a wonderful program lined up, and we're very grateful to Susan Glassman and Laura Newman for arranging our speakers, and as always to Laura Rose for making everything happen behind the scenes. So I'm going to turn the program over to Laura Newman, who's going to introduce our speakers. Laura.
Okay, thank you, Ruth, and good evening. And again, thank you for joining us. We have several speakers joining us this evening, so I'm going to introduce each of them and they will share their perspective on immigration with us. Our first speaker is Anna Crosslin. Anna led the International Institute of St. Louis from 1978 until her recent retirement this spring. She's also the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions. She has routinely been identified as one of St. Louis Business Journal's most influential St. Louisans, including awards for diversity and women's leadership. And in June 2015, Anna was recognized as a White House Champion of Change for World Refugee Day. And she's also been awarded 2 honorary doctorates from local universities, Webster and Washington University. And Anna's going to share her perspective on, our focus today on a historical perspective on immigration. And she's also going to give us the overview and activities around the International Institute. Marie Kenyon will follow Anna, and Marie has been director of the Peace and Justice Commission of the Archdiocese of St. Louis since 2015, and also chairs the Immigration Task Force for the Archdiocese. She's also a graduate of the St. Louis University Law School. And she was founder and managing attorney of the Catholic Legal Assistance Ministry which includes the Catholic Immigration Law Project from 1987 to 2015. And Marie will give us a legal perspective on immigration, both from a federal and local perspective. Then she will be followed by Sister Sandy Straub, who just recently returned from El Paso, right on the border. So she has a firsthand account of the border situation. We'll end the presentation with Marie and Anna providing us some action and activities we can do both as advocates as well as direct service types of things. So you'll see a chat button at the bottom of your screen. So as we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will take your questions at the end of the presentation. Susan will coordinate that process for us. So Anna, it's to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I'm so pleased to be able to speak with you this evening. I'm supposed to cram a lot into 20 minutes. And so I'm going to do a lot of real big, broad brush kinds of statements. And please forgive me because I'm going to take centuries and statements and all kinds of things and kind of gloom them into a sentence or two or a paragraph at the most. But I'm, we want to be, we want to be able to give time for everybody to be able to share some really important information with you. What I'm going to do in about 20 minutes is try to hit on 4 points. And one is, how did we go from a region, from St. Louis, a place that had 50% immigrants in 1850, to a population today of about 4.7%. What happened in St. Louis that resulted in that situation? The second thing then is, a little bit about anti-immigrant sentiment. It's always been with us. That's not new. How has it changed, though? Perhaps might be a little bit new. Then I'm also going to talk about the 3 tracks through which all foreign-born in the United States are admitted, so that you can better understand how our immigration system actually operates at this point, who is admissible, et cetera, because you don't know how to be able to fit people who aren't admissible in unless you know who is admissible. And then the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to really look at, based on that immigration system, I'm going to look at what has happened in the last 4 years under the most recent, but not the current administration, in terms of drops in visa issuances at consulates abroad, and how has that affected the admissions numbers to the United States. And then I know some of you are interested in the whole question of refugees and what's going on with the refugee program right now and how's that going to impact St. Louis, et cetera. And I will address those issues then in the wrap-up period when Marie and I speak again. So without further ado, then let me get started. And like I said, this is going to be real broad brush because we're going to start 12,000 years back by saying that Native Americans were the first people that were in this region 12,000 years ago. We've heard of them. We've heard, probably seen the Mississippi mounds, Cahokia, etc. One number, though, to remember is that explorers then came in the 1500s. The Spanish came in the 1500s. The French then came in the 1600s. St. Louis was founded in 1764, okay? 30 years, almost 30 years before the land on which St. Louis was founded became part of the United States, okay? You think about it, 1764 and 1803 then was the Louisiana Purchase. So we were under several flags for 30 years before we actually became part of America. So 1803 then, and what was really happening when we did become part of America? And how did that coincide with some really big tectonic shifts that were taking place in the country? One of which obviously was the results of westward expansion. Well, it also coincided then with the whole, changes because of the Industrial Revolution, et cetera, and changes in transportation. And how did people get to the middle of the United States? If we think about it back in those days, it was mainly by boat, okay? And up and down the Mississippi River was one of the ways, instead of being across land. 1809, I think it was, the steamboat came into being at that point. And all of a sudden, a huge change then in what that transportation began to look like. You could go much faster. There could be bigger boats. There could be lots more people who were being transported along with goods and services. And so the steamboat era itself then ensued for 40, 50 years or more. And the major route then into the United States during that period was up and down the Mississippi River. But what happened then, and so let me see if I can do this now and do it properly. I'm going to share my screen here, and you're going to get some data. I only have 4. Okay, here we go. I only have 4 slides that I'm going to share today. And this will, I'm told that this is all part of, a recording that's being done. And so you don't have to save these numbers or anything, because you can go online afterward and actually see these slides again at the Women's Voices website. But anyway, so here are historic patterns of immigrants in St. Louis, 1817 to 1860, the steamboat era. As you can see in 1850, by 1850, we'd had 2 major groups, some smaller groups, but 2 major groups that have arrived in the United States after the explorers that I mentioned earlier, the Germans who started coming just after the turn of the century, and then the Irish that started coming in the 1830s. By the 1850s, then, we were the 8th largest city in the United States, and 50%, as I mentioned a moment ago, of our population was foreign born. Makes sense. You know, we had very little population here when we were founded. We were basically a fur trading post. And so everybody who was coming, you know, it wasn't the people who were already settled into businesses, et cetera, you know, throughout the East Coast, but it was the new people who were arriving from abroad, who were coming into the heartland, trying to find land and make a way for themselves. We continued to grow then. As you can see in the 1880s, we became 6th, so our rank was growing. But look what's happening to our foreign-born number. It's starting to drop. And so 30% in 1880, 1900, we're the 4th largest city in the United States, and yet our foreign-born population has dropped to 19%. And so, you know, you begin to say, well, golly, you know, we obviously have this growth like crazy here in St. Louis, but it's not necessarily from people who are coming from abroad anymore. It appears to be from people who are in fact moving across the United States now by land, and maybe 2nd generation as opposed to 1st generation doing it. And as you can see here, 1930, we're suddenly 10th, end to end. Most recently in 2019, then we are the 20th ranking city in the United States, and our foreign-born population is 4.7%. And that's compared to a 13.7% national average for MSAs. So very, very dramatic change in those 150, 170 years in terms of not just our ranking, but also our percentage of foreign born. You can pretty much see, looking at this, that clearly high numbers of immigrants impact the number of overall people that you have in a city, and therefore impact our standings. So what was happening within these numbers that really caused a couple of things to be happening? One is that up there in 1869 was the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. So, and what that did then was it linked the East Coast and the West Coast together by rail, with the hub of the railroad being Chicago. So all of a sudden, all of the new immigrants who were arriving in the United States, they no longer took the long and expensive trip around Florida and up the Mississippi River, but they were coming by railroad. And if they stopped off in the Midwest to settle, chances were they were going to stop off in Chicago, no longer in St. Louis. We were still so powerful, as you can see here, in terms of growth and impact, that by the time the World's Fair occurred just after 1900 in 1904, we were indeed 4th largest in the United States, even though our population, our foreign-born population, had dropped. And we were so powerful at that point that we could wrestle together the World's Fair and the Summer Olympics here in St. Louis at the same time. And we took it away from Chicago to be able to do it. That was the last, because Chicago was smaller than us, but that was the last time Chicago was smaller than us. And within a few years, then we began to drop, and Chicago then began to grow dramatically in terms of their population. The second thing that happened in terms of massive drop then in population of immigrants here in St. Louis was that St. Louis grew, and that was after 1900 and in 1919. Well, about 1910 to 1970 are the actual years. But those are the years of the great migration of African Americans from the South. And St. Louis was one of the main welcoming cities for that migration, along with Milwaukee and Chicago and Cleveland and Cincinnati and Philadelphia, etc. And so we had large numbers of African Americans who were coming to the community within those years. And as a consequence, then the foreign-born population became a smaller percentage of the share of our total population. So those are some of the dynamics that are behind the numbers that we see here. So then, you really, I'm going to go past. All right. So what I mentioned as I started this out, saying that anti-immigrant sentiment had always been with us. And here are a couple of cartoons, in fact, the newspaper cartoons that occurred in the late 1800s that are really very abominable. Some of you may remember from your history lessons, in fact, about the what am I thinking about? Oh, about the Know Nothing Party, which was anti-immigrant in a big way. There were a lot of scare tactics that were used. Catholics, in fact, were very disparaged within the population of the United States for many years, and they certainly didn't want more coming. And to the degree where in 1924, then an immigration act, the Immigration Act of 1924, was passed, and that Immigration Act then was the first time that quotas were established and passports were issued and all of this kind of stuff. Prior to 1924, none of that stuff really existed. And it was done, they say, to regulate, but in reality to limit, because what they did was they based their admissions numbers on percentages of individuals who were in the United States in 1890. And by doing so, they eliminated almost all of certain populations that they were very nervous about admitting to the United States, including, as I said, Catholics. They were very concerned that the Catholics would not follow the President of the United States. That in fact the Pope was higher in their allegiances, and so whether it was and so they established really an admissions process that focused on Northern Europeans. That was what it was really all about, were Northern Europeans and their admission to the United States. But during the late 1800s and coming into then the 1920s, as all of this fomenting was taking place in various cities, and if you remember, St. Louis was really very significant at that point. We were, sixth and then fourth in terms of size in the United States. It was into that environment then in 1919 that the International Institute actually came. And it was founded at that time as part of a national movement on the part of the YWCA. And what they saw were a tremendous number in the years following World War I. They saw a large number of displaced and refugee women and their children entering the United States and working in industrialized areas around the United States. They had no one to be able to advocate for services, to teach English, to be able to help them achieve a decent lifestyle for they and their children, etc. And so the YWCA established about 50 of what they called International Institute committees of various YWCAs around the country. And that then became the beginnings of the International Institute movement. Now, those organizations, many of them closed down in the 1920s, particularly leading up to 1929, just after 1929 and the stock market crash. But today, about 18 of them still provide services in various cities around the United States. We have become separate autonomous organizations, and we serve men in addition to women and their children. We serve the whole family at that point, and our services really are in some ways similar to the services, the welcoming services that were the very essence of the beginning of the International Institute, and that has to do with teaching English so people can communicate, getting a job so people have financial security, and really being able to communicate between the individuals and the wider community, being able to provide welcoming services, translation services, all of the kinds of things, socialization, etc., so that these new immigrants had a place in the community to be able to call their home. And so the International Institute today then, while it's larger, it's more diverse because the populations here in St. Louis are more diverse. We still provide we have in the last year helped over 5,000 people from about 70 countries with the kinds of services that I just mentioned, but also then with additional services that are now added on for entrepreneurs and career path services for individuals who come over here with a university degree and want to be able to get back into their profession again. Counseling services for the people who arrive over here with PTSD, etc. And so there are a variety of different kinds of services. We are like the welcoming center for these newcomers when they arrive in the community. Now, I'm going to go back now. Let's see, I can go up. There we go. Okay, I promised to talk with you a little bit about the categories of admission to the United States. This is dry stuff, but if you could, I've tried to distill it into one page, because if you see it like this, then I think it flows better and you have a better understanding of what's going on. In 1965, with the Immigration Act of 1965, which was the first major piece of immigration law after that 1924 act that I spoke about earlier, which reversed much of what in fact was in that 1924 act, and for the first time then allocated admissions numbers to Asia and Africa and Latin America. The system, the Immigration Act put into effect a three category system, if we want to call it that. The first track here, which I refer to as the citizenship track, is an immigrant admissions system, and it has to do with individuals who are granted a visa to be admitted to the United States on what's called the citizenship track. And so as you see here, there are 5 categories of admissions presently that are part of that process. There's family sponsored, and that has to do with people who are related to a permanent resident or a U.S. citizen who is foreign born. And it has to be a close relationship. It's not just like anybody, but it's a close relationship. There are labor certifications, which means that a company like Monsanto or Boeing can apply for a STEM worker that they may not be able to find in the community, etc. There's a diversity visa category, which is called a lottery for people who don't fit into other categories. And so 55,000 applications a year can be granted through the lottery itself. Refugees, and it should say, are part of this system as well. And so that means that by act of Congress on an annual basis, the White House administration recommends an admission number to the United States. Congress then has the right to be able to fund that number or not. And then refugees are admitted to the United States. If they get a visa within that refugee program, then they are automatically on the citizenship track. The final category that's there is called political asylees. And it's important to understand and differentiate between that and a broad category of individuals that we simply refer to as asylees. As these are not asylee applicants, but these are individuals who were asylee applicants who have negotiated the labyrinth of legal laws and requirements, etc., and have actually been granted political asylum. Once they are granted political asylum, they become eligible for all resettlement services that refugees receive. And I'm not sure everybody understands that, but that's one thing that's important to note here. And they are on the citizenship track. The second category then, which is called temporary visa holders, once again, this has to do with granting of visas that's done overseas in consulates, etc. These are people who are time limited, 3-6 months. They can be extended in some cases for up to a year. And the primary categories that fall into temporary visa holders are visitors, students, and guest workers. Now note that these guest workers are different from the labor certification category up above. You will hear people refer to, labor certifications, to H-1Bs, etc. H-1Bs, am I messing up that number? I'll look at it in a minute and see. But when they're talking about those are on a citizenship track, these second ones, guest workers, have to do, once again, with time-limited visas that are granted to employers in order to go, in most cases, to Mexico and hire people who come back to work for 6 months or a year, let's say in lawn service or other kinds of temporary workers, seasonal worker kinds of situations. There's a small number of other categories that are also admitted as guest workers, as you can see, artists, entertainers, athletes, etc. And they can sometimes, and intra-company transfers, sometimes these individuals can therefore then transition to the citizenship track if one of these other requirements can be met. The final category then is called the undocumented or out of status. That means that either they simply never had documentation, or they may have entered the United States in the temporary visa holder category and overstayed their visa. These individuals then are claimed to be having crossed the border illegally. And I'm not going to talk a lot about that category, but instead I'm going to let Marie address that in her remarks. The final, let's see there. Okay. So looking at the first two tracks and what has happened, what's the trend in terms of admissions to the United States? Because some of you may have noticed that it said that ordinarily there's about 700,000. That can be as many as 700,000 to 1 million admitted to the United States in the immigrant category. And there potentially is 15 million non-immigrants. But as you look at the numbers here, they really don't play out to those kinds of numbers that are on the other sheet. As you can see here, the first three columns are the Obama administration, the second term of the Obama administration. As you can see, there was growth in the immigrant numbers. FY 2016, which would have been from October of 2015 through September of 2016. You see large numbers there, and also for FY 2015, they got to 11.4 million total between the two categories. So they were really pushing those 2 years, and they were at 11.4 and 11 really in those 2 years. The first year then of the Trump administration, you see as FY 17, that began in October of 2016. He was elected in November of 2016 and inaugurated then at the end of January of 2016. If you will remember, that's the year then where we had 3 travel bans that were associated with refugee resettlement and the blocking of most people from Middle Eastern countries, et cetera, et cetera. So that began in 2017, and you saw then a drop of about 750,000 total visas issued then in 2017. But then as you look at your numbers from there, you see in 2018, we had a further drop of maybe 700,000. And over here then in 2019, then we see another drop of, about 350,000. And then of course, 2020, the numbers just went through the floor, partially because of COVID. But also because of a variety of different kinds of administrative changes that the Trump administration had made that made it much more difficult, even for people within the categories that I mentioned to you already, to be able to successfully obtain a visa. So, the final thing I want to leave you with from this portion is that what President Biden now is starting with in FY21 is two things. One is that he's starting with admissions through February of 2021 of 55,140 people for immigrant admissions. That's how low it had dropped in the period before the two administrations had really switched over. And now with COVID then on top of it, and the slowness of spin up of changes in administrative procedures and law that have hampered the resettlement program already, it is unlikely that we're going to see the numbers pick up rapidly and get back to the numbers of the Obama administration within any time soon. So let me stop there and let me at this point introduce Marie Kenyon then, who is, here we go, who's now going to pick up on the presentations. Marie, you have to
If I was going to say, I can do it if I unmute myself. And Laura, no, I'm fine. I had sent her an email earlier saying help because my internet went down today. But so it was an email from an old internet. Anyway, thank you so much for being here tonight. It really does us good to see this many people who are taking time out from a busy Thursday night just to sit and talk about an issue that is really affecting us and our place in the world. And so many of our brothers and sisters who are on the move. And I think, nobody really wants to move unless there's a compelling reason. People like their home countries. People like their homeland. They like their families around them. But if there's a compelling reason that they feel like it's better for them or their families, then they move. But it's not, we all have to understand that most people want to stay where they're at, unless there's for some reason they don't feel like it's in their family's best interest. So as Anna said, in terms of the legal system and the law on this, what you need to understand is immigration is administrative. It's the policies. This is not, you don't go to court. It's not state court. And you only go to federal court if you exhaust your administrative remedies, and then you petition to be able to go to federal court. So it's all administrative, which means it's all dependent, and the policies are all dependent on who the president is and who the attorney general is. And so we saw a lot of these changes happen under the Trump administration and when Jeff Sessions was the attorney general. Most people immigrate to the United States through family-based visas. And the whole idea behind it is we try to reunite families. But when we say families, the only people who are allowed to, the only people as you as a United States citizen are allowed to petition for are your spouse, your children, your parents, and your siblings. So when you hear about, oh, my grandparents, my cousins, my uncle, my aunt, even if you wanted to bring them over, the law does not allow you to do so. So family-based petitions are very, very narrow in who they're allowed to even invite to come. And so you apply for a visa. And when you apply for a visa for somebody in your family to come over, you basically have to say that you have to show how you're related to them. You have to make sure they have to have medical tests. They have to have a criminal background check. They check and see if have they ever tried to enter the country illegally. And you have to sign a piece of paper saying that you are going to be financially responsible for them. And so when people say, oh, they want to come over and they want to, get benefits and drain our country of whatever, that's simply not true. If I'm bringing somebody over, I have to say I'm going to be financially responsible for these people. And the other thing is there's also a hefty price tag that comes along with it. If you come over, if you have a visa to come over as permanently, you are considered a lawful permanent resident or an LPR. And that means you have the green card. And when you have a green card, that means that you can work and you can stay as long as you want unless you do something that would cause you to get deported. If you commit a crime, then that's one of the options, depending on the severity of the crime or something like that. But for the most part, if you have a green card, you can stay and you are considered a permanent resident. Once you have been a permanent resident, once you have your green card for 5 years, then you get to apply for citizenship, or it's also called naturalization. Now, there's some exceptions to that, and some people can apply after 2 years, some people can apply after 3 years, but for the most part, people have to be LPRs. You have to be in this country with a green card for 5 years before you can even apply. A funny personal story about green cards. So I am a child of immigrants. My father was born in Italy and came over when he was young, but my mother was born in England, and she met my father when he was stationed there in the Air Force and came over. My mother refused to become a citizen until after my grandmother had died, because she didn't want my grandmother to think that she was renouncing the crown. And so my mother actually had a green card for about 45 years. So you can have a green card, it's not automatic that after the end of 5 years, you can apply for citizenship. You have to apply for citizenship. It's up to you. So one of the things I think it's important that you realize is for people to say, if you're a citizen, can you apply for your parents? Yes, you can. But you have to be 21 years old before you can apply for your parents. So when people talk about anchor babies, there is no such thing as an anchor baby. If you come over here undocumented, without status, and you have a child, and that child, it was born in the United States, that child can't apply for you for you to get your green card until that child's 21 years old. And by then, who knows what's going to happen? Who's going to get deported? To say, well, they come over and they have these babies right away as anchor babies. It's just simply not true. Under the law, you are not allowed to do that. The only people that can apply for visas for their parents are people that are 21 years old. The other thing I think it's important for you to know about is how long it takes. It takes a very long time, and especially depending on what country you're trying to bring your family member from. So there's this thing called the Department of State Visa Bulletin, and you can Google it, and it comes out every month. And in that bulletin, it will say what visas they're working on, where are they up to, what in the line. So I just looked right before we got on the Zoom, and for May 2021, if I am a citizen of the United States and I am trying to bring my married son or daughter, remember I said you can bring children under 21 and then married. I'm trying to bring my married son or daughter from Mexico. They're just this month starting to work on visas that were filed in October of 1996. So again, get in line, file to bring them over, do it the legal way. Well, that's the legal way right now. If you want to bring your brother, your married brother and sister over, good luck, because it's a 25-year wait. So once you're over and you are an LPR, then you can decide that you're going to be, you can apply for your citizenship, but it's not automatic. So once you're here and you want to apply, you have to prove that you can speak English. There are some exceptions. Sometimes we saw this, and Anna can talk about this too, when with the Bosnians, when we were bringing older people over that just, were coming at the age of 80 and they just couldn't learn to speak English, and we would get doctor's waivers for them. But for the most part, you have to prove that you can speak English. You have to take a history and civics test, and it's very difficult. And under the Trump administration, it became even more difficult. And I'm sure if most of you tried to take it, you would have a hard time passing. I know I would. You have to prove, again, you have to go through a medical, you have to, again, do the criminal history, and then you also have to pay a big filing fee. And that was another thing that the Trump administration did, is they greatly increased the filing fee. So, I mean, immigration law is complex and we could talk about it for hours, but even if you follow all the rules and you do everything you're supposed to do, it is not easy to come to the United States in a lawful manner, and people do. But then let's talk about people who are undocumented or people without status. Well, when they say undocumented without status, the largest percentage of those who are people who have overstayed their temporary visas, people who came over as students and never left, people came over on a vacation visa and never left. The people who actually come across the border without a visa, it's a small percentage of what we call undocumented folks. Most of them are people who actually came into the United States legally, but overstayed their visa. What happens to them? Well, Sister Sandy's going to talk about what she's seeing down at the border, but if you are an adult and you come across and you don't have a visa and you get picked up by the Border Patrol, you get put in detention. And sometimes they send you right back to Mexico, and other times they will let you get out, and then you will go to one of the places that Sister Sandy worked at, and then you'll go to somebody in, where you have family, somebody that you can connect with. I will tell you, in all the years that I used to run the Immigration Law Project, I didn't know anybody who came without knowing somebody. And it could have been somebody in their family, somebody in their village, their parents, their brother, their sister. Nobody, I don't know anybody who came just on their own. And so then you're assigned a court date. And a lot of times you have to wear an ankle monitor if you're not detained. Some people are detained. Some people just have to stay in jail or in a detention center until their court date. But the people that are let out, then a lot of times they have to wear an ankle monitor. And those are the people, I see some people on the screen who volunteer with IFCLA, and they can tell you about what it means to wear an ankle monitor. And then you go to court. If you go to court and you have a lawyer, you are in a lot better shape than those of the people who go to court and they don't have a lawyer and try to prove their case about why they should be allowed to stay in the country because they have a well-founded fear of persecution and they can't go back to their own country. But could you imagine going to court? You don't speak English very well, if at all. You don't know the language. You don't know the laws. They say, well, where's your evidence? Well, when you're fleeing your country, how you don't think about, you don't realize, well, I have to have, evidence showing that this person tried to, this gang member tried to kill me, or the police picked me up. And so the percentage of people that go to court without lawyers that actually successfully win their case, slim to none. I talked to Chris Valentic before I got on the call, and Chris is the immigration lawyer for Catholic Legal Assistance Ministry right now. I said, well, because immigration court's in Kansas City. And I said, well, tell me the percentage of cases you win. And she said, there's 2 judges in Kansas City. And one judge, she wins less than 10% of her cases. With the other judge, she wins less than 20% of her cases. So even with people who are lawyers, or good lawyers who know how to gather the evidence, and it's because the law, the law is how it's written. It makes it very, very difficult to prove your case. I mean, one of the things we used to be able to, people who were victims of domestic violence, we used to be able to make a case that they couldn't go back because they were afraid that they were going to get killed by their abuser, and the well-documented cases. Well, Jeff Sessions did away with that. That's no longer an excuse. So, I mean, I'm not telling you guys anything that you don't already know, but it's that, I mean, that we need reforms in the immigration system. They're going to be difficult for some reason. Congress just can't get it together on this issue. But we can talk more about that afterwards. What I want to do now is I want to introduce my friend, Sister Sandy Straub. Sister is a sister of St. Joe Carondelet, and she just spent 3 weeks down at one of the shelters in El Paso. So, Sister, you good?
Go at it.
Okay, all right. Sister,
Can you hear me?
we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, so
Okay.
let me just say that there were 3 of us who went down to El Paso in the middle of April and came back in May. And we were very, very grateful for the people of St. Louis, really. You sponsored us, you called us forth, and of course, our own congregation. We thank our congregation for supporting us financially in many, many ways. But we went down to El Paso to work in Annunciation Corporation, and we were assigned to Casa de Refugiado. This is a great, big, huge warehouse that Annunciation has rented. Within that, they could serve probably 1,000 people a day. They're down to about anywhere from 20 to 100 a day. So that's the amount of people that we saw, about 120 to 100 a day. Each person that goes down there is vetted. You have to walk the line that they want you to walk. This is my 3rd time serving in El Paso, as it was with Sister Maureen and Sister Joanne, the other 2 with whom I went. So we were not newbies in helping the refugee or the person who's looking to enter the United States. Why do we go down there? We go down there to walk with the marginalized, really, and to welcome the unwelcomed. There's probably not that's why we're down there. And who did we see? Well, when we were down there, we saw basically Hondurans, people from Honduras. That's about 1,700 miles from El Paso, if you kind of think of that. And these people, most of them walked, or they were on their camionetas, which are little small trucks. That's how they got up to the border. We also saw people from Cuba. They were asking for a political asylum. That was a little different than Hondurans. They were asking because they thought they were refugees. We saw a few people from El Salvador and maybe 1 or 2 Mexicans and 1 or 2 Guatemalans. Basically, we served at the Casa de Refugiado. We served people who were families. We thought we were going to serve children. Well, we did serve a lot of children. But we serve families, mother and dad and 5 children, or mother and 5 children, or a young woman with 1 person. So our work was physical work. We worked for 8 hours every day, six days of the 7-day week. So it was long work. And we were assigned to the clothing room, and we also served lunch. We set it up, we served it, we cleaned it up, lunch and supper. So our days were very full. That gave us the opportunity, however, to two of the three of us spoke Spanish. It gave us the opportunity to listen to people. Not that we were there to inquire, but just to see, to welcome them. And we got all kinds of wonderful, wonderful stories, really. The object of the Casa de Refugiado really is to process, to welcome, to give these folks clean clothes, to give them a safe shelter. They sleep on a little bunk, and to move them from the asylum seeker status to their sponsor, wherever that is. So it's really a blip in their life, if you really want to think about it. And that's how you look at it. It's a blip, but you're there to welcome them. Let me see here. So we were there for 3 weeks. And I would say that the number we served were between 20 and 100 a day. And so that was a constant overflow of people who came in and went out, came in and went out. So the 2 jobs that we had, of course, you can imagine there's a laundry job and there's a cleaning of the floor job and there's all that kind of, and there's a processing job. There's a couple of stories I thought maybe you might like to hear. One is there was a woman who had 5 children. Her husband somehow either abandoned them or he was gone. She was 9 months pregnant. She was a Honduran woman, and her oldest child was 11 years old, and she was traveling by bus from El Paso to Boston in the middle of April. They were detainees. They came in with fleece pants and those blue cotton tops. All of them, none of the clothes fit these folks. They were all way too big on them. This woman had no money in her pocket. I mean, no money, not even any money. We slipped her a few dollars, and we probably weren't supposed to, but we had to. She was on her way all those hundreds of miles with her children. She was going to live with her sister up in Boston. We were very concerned that she was going to have her baby right there in the Casa de Refugiado. She did not. We don't think she had it on the bus, but she was 9 months pregnant. That's one story. Of course, there were lots of tears from this family because they really did not want to leave Honduras. Another story is a case of another Honduran family. They had four children there with them. They were 2 older teenage boys, a 16-year-old girl and a 13-year-old girl. They too walked all the way from Honduras up through Mexico, and they got to some city in the middle of Mexico. And while they were there in some kind of a little refugee camp, the 16-year-old was taken from them by the cartel. And she was gone from them for 3 days. The father, if you saw this man's face, you would go, oh my goodness. He was absolutely so worried about his 16-year-old daughter. They finally found the girl. When they did, I don't know who tested her, but they tested her physically and psychologically. She had no affect to her face whatsoever, 16-year-old. When we first met her, they were in the casa for about 3 days waiting for their trip to take place. They were going to go to New York from El Paso. The only way this father got this daughter back from the cartel was to pay $5,000. I said to him, where did you get this $5,000? He said, sister, I had to borrow it. And he said, and if I didn't borrow it, they were going to kill me and my family, all of my family. And he said, and if I don't pay it back, they're going to kill all of my family. The mother was sitting at the table and she said, you have no idea, at this town in Mexico, there are so many Hondurans that have been killed for this very reason. She said, hundreds of them are buried in this town. I, for the life of me, cannot remember that. It starts with a T, but I maybe it's God's way of saying you don't need to know where this is. But this must be a terrible, terrible place. So these folks got their daughter back. They owe $5,000. and they're on their way. And another family that we met were a Haitian family, large, 5 children. This family came up through all of South America, and she had a baby in Mexico, and she had a baby in Venezuela. Their concern was that they had a child who was 15 years old. She had sickle cell anemia, pernicious anemia, and she was really, really very seriously ill in the hospital. I don't really know what happened with her, but the kinds of folks that we met down on the border, there were what they call the MPP. These are the people who came over during President Trump's time, and they sought asylum. They received papers. They then were sent back to the border, and they waited on the border. Some of them 2 years, some of them we met were 11 months. Some of them, in fact, the one family that we met was 11 months on that border, waiting to come over and to receive the okay that they could actually enter the United States more legally. That's one kind of person. The other people, there's this little family that I talked to you about that had the fleece pants on and the blue t-shirts. They were in detention. Those families come in with nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. No papers, none of their passports, nothing. Their shoes are flip-flops. Everything's kind of been taken from them. So our story then was to outfit them from shoes all the way up and all the way through to the underwear. They are very, very sad people. They are happy they're, in a more safe place, but they have lost absolutely everything. Now the story is, and I think this is a pretty true story, that some of these folks that have been at MPPs in Mexico, they then come over into the McAllen area. They're picked up by our border people. They're put on an airplane. Excuse me. They're put on an airplane. They transport them to El Paso. They get off the airplane in El Paso, and they use Title 42 against them and send all of them back over to the border, over into Juarez. Now, imagine you spent 2 years on a border in McAllen, and then all of a sudden you're on the other side of Texas. You don't have any connection. You have no papers. You have no money, and you start your paperwork all over again. That is still happening during the Biden administration. They're using the Title 42, that title that came into being in the mid-20th century to keep people out from Europe who had some kind of diseases. They are using that title for COVID. Now, you remember, there are many ports of entries in the United States, but not just the southern border. But the only place where this is being used is the southern border. So one has to say, no, why? Is it because they don't want brown people or black people or people of color entering our country? It's hard not to say that, actually. The only ones I saw that had those big bracelets on, when I was there in 2016, everybody got a big bracelet on their ankle. The only ones I saw in this trip with the big ankle bracelets were the Cuban refugees, the ones who are looking for political asylum. You don't really know why, but why they have it and the others don't. Maybe they're a bigger source of fleeing. I really don't know. I guess I would say one more thing about our government. Every day you don't know when they're coming. The folks who are your guests, you don't know. You don't know how many. You don't know where they're coming from. It's a lot of secrets, and you just have to be adaptive. That's all you have to say. Well, this is who's coming. But it does make you wonder that we couldn't be either a little more efficient, a little more kind, a little more something. I think that, you're making, Anna and Marie, wonderful cases about reform and changing some of these immigration laws. But there are human persons here who suffer. And that's, I think, what we three sisters saw. And there were probably about 20 volunteers there that were what you call not permanent, just there for a couple of weeks. And there were probably about maybe 7 or 8 volunteers who had given up a whole year. And these were pretty much young people for the whole year. I'll leave you with one last story that just is, I think, really heartwarming. There was a young woman there. She just graduated from being a medical doctor, but she's going into residency. And she was there for 2 months. She's going to work as an emergency doctor in Phoenix. But right before she left, she came into the clothing store and she said, I want a pair of those fleece pants. Now, you're just talking about jersey fleece pants. And so the person that was serving her said, well, here's a pair of brand new ones. She said, oh, no. I don't want the brand new one. She said, I want the pair that somebody wore. She said, I don't want to forget the suffering that I saw down here. And I want to grow in my understanding of compassion. So I leave you with a few stories. And I hope that I've opened your heart a little bit to the immigrant. And just think about it. Nobody wants to leave their country and walk 1,700 miles and then just to wait on a border for another couple of years, unless there's really a reason to do so. Amen.
Thanks so much, sister.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Marie, did the other potential speaker come on or no? Well, then perhaps you and I should go ahead and complete our presentation if you want to unmute
Yes.
yourself.
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
This has been incredibly enlightening. Even for me, I've been at this for 42 years or whatever it is, but every time I hear someone speak, I hear something new, and it helps me to have such a stronger vision of the total picture and how we're all affected, how we're all together in this as a world. I found myself thinking as I was hearing the stories about the southern border. Here's a number for you that I find pretty amazing, which is at any given time in the world, there are 250 million people who are in motion, who are moving, who are migrating from some place to another. Some of that is simply by choice, and some of it is not. That we're talking. What is it now, Marie? 70, 80 million refugees. The number is up to, and then internally displaced individuals on top of that who happen. The difference is refugees are people who are outside of their country of origin, who have fled a well-founded fear of persecution. IDPs, internally displaced individuals, are people who had to flee from one city or area of their country to another, but remain within the country. And so both of those numbers together now are in excess, I believe, of 100 million. It's really
It's the most since World War II.
Yeah, it's the worst. It's the worst crisis
since World War II.
Yeah. So what can we here in the community do? And both in terms of assisting some individuals, the lucky few who managed to make it here, and also then to add our voices to the larger voices advocating for more admissions of all individuals. One of the things that I want to say today, doesn't matter, a person is a refugee, an asylee, just needs help. Everybody's a human being, and we need to be able to reach out and help those individuals as the need arises, to the extent that we can. There are a couple things about the refugee program that I just wanted to mention, and then I'll turn this over to Marie. But in terms of the refugee program, I showed you those numbers. I ended on sort of a bleak number, which was how much the refugees admissions had plummeted in the United States. And now what is going to be happening, because the Biden administration has obviously approved a much larger number than the Trump administration did for admissions, both for this year and for its plans for next year. Well, first of all, let me tell you that leaving the number at 15,000 for this year was not a terrible idea anyway, because we're only going to be able to probably get 15, maximum 20,000 into the United States this year anyway. Next year, the numbers could go up, but here's the situation that led to the terrible situation with refugee arrivals this year. As of the end of April, only 2,348 refugees had been admitted to the United States. And that was out of a Trump ceiling, previously approved ceiling of about 15,000, I believe it was. So we weren't anywhere near even the 15,000 that they had approved, because the categories that they selected for admission this year were a total mismatch with the actual need of refugees that were out there. They weren't interested in admitting people from the Middle East. They weren't interested in admitting African refugees, etc. They were focused on Christian populations, small Christian populations that, quite frankly, they could not find enough applicants to be able to fill the visas that were available for them, hence 2,348. Had Biden simply revamped, as he had intended to, revamp the numbers so that the categories of admission had changed from the ones that were approved by Trump, we probably wouldn't have been in any worse condition than we are now. The reason for that is because Trump didn't just approve smaller admissions numbers. He dismantled the refugee resettlement program abroad. And so there aren't circuit rides going on. Two things. One is, for some countries, they can't occur because of COVID challenges. In other countries, they weren't occurring because they weren't part of the priority populations that the Trump administration was admitting. So, for instance, right now, Nairobi, Kiev, and Istanbul, which are three of the four largest processing centers abroad, are closed. They're on lockdown. They're on lockdown because of COVID. And so until that gets under control, they're not going to even be able to start interviewing individuals to be able to process them and be able to move them to the United States if they manage to successfully get through the COVID testing process on top of 13 steps of vetting. The Congolese processing centers could be open, but weren't because of the lack of priority at that point for resettlement. So at the earliest, the feds are assuming right now that they're really not going to get priority processes going for overseas circuit rides until July. And so that's going to mean 9 months down the line before we begin to see arrivals in the United States in any large numbers. There will be more arrivals coming now because there were some people in the pipeline that had already gotten through their admission steps, etc., that then couldn't get a visa to come over because they weren't part of the priority group. And those individuals then are going to be able to come. For instance, Ariel recently told me from our resettlement program at the International Institute that unexpectedly now she has 13 Congolese arrivals during May in 3 family units. So some people are coming, but we're not going to see numbers to fill that 62,500 for this current year, which goes through September 30th. And the likelihood of hitting 125,000 next year may be low also, because the first 4 to 6 months of next year is going to be very much wound up in COVID aftermath and then the beginning of this resettlement process again. But there are going to be more people coming than were before. Should you be interested in assisting in terms of refugee resettlement here in St. Louis, particularly if you're a French speaker, with Congolese coming, French speakers are important. You should contact Valerie Lamping at the International Institute. That's LAMPINGV at IISTL.org. And there will be a variety of different kinds of individual and group volunteer processes that will be being developed and become more active as we move further into the summer. At that point, I'm going to stop and let Marie talk a little bit, and then we'll go into questions and answers.
And just a couple of things in terms of legislation, because I know women's voices are amazing in their advocacy work. Sadly, not a whole lot is moving right now on the federal level. Everybody's involved with infrastructure and other things, but if you are interested, the people in St. Louis who are really monitoring that, I would go to the IFCLA website. I don't know, does immigration, does the International Institute on their website have the advocacy piece for
We don't
immigration?
necessarily. We belong to MIRA and
Okay,
participate
right.
through
So you
those
can look at-
organizations rather than doing
Right,
it
the
separately.
MARIS
Right.
website, Missouri Immigration and
Refugee advocacy.
advocacy group. I would, for if you're interested from the Catholic perspective, there's Justice for Immigrants, which is out of the USCCB, and they're the people that are kind of telling us real time what we should advocate for. But there's nothing really pressing right now. On the state level, this year we worked, because undocumented students, when they go to our state schools, pay the international student rate, not even outstate, they pay the international student rate. And we advocated for that, but we can't even get health insurance. So you can imagine how much traction that got, basically none. But we'll try again next year. Locally, what can you do to help people? A couple of agencies that St. Francis Community Services, that's an agency of Catholic Charities that deals with immigrants, and they focus on those without documentation. So they, I think they have at least 5 of the unaccompanied minors that you've been hearing about have made their way to family members in St. Louis. So they are looking for everything. I mean, these kids come with nothing. They don't have, maybe a backpack, and sister can let you know. I mean, when they travel, they have nothing. So there's always a need for monetary donations, clothes donations. I think that, and then I talked about IFCLA. The MICA project provides free legal assistance to immigrants. The only people that are entitled to free lawyers are people who have been accused of a crime, but they don't count immigration. So anybody who wants a lawyer to go with them to immigration court, they have to either pay for one or get a free one. So any of the agencies around town who represent folks, I think they could always use. Ruth put something in the chat about IFCLA. And then sister, can you talk for just a minute about what you guys need? Because the CSJs are continuing their ministry on the border and they still need stuff. So sister, can you say how you can donate?
Yes, you could donate directly to mission advancement through the CSJs. And right now that is monies that are accumulating to send more sisters down to the border to work with those folks on the border. Sister Maureen has just gone down to Laredo to see what they need at Catholic Charities there in the Laredo Center. Each center has different kinds of needs. Sister Norma Pimentel out of the McClellan area, she has a website you can go on to, and she puts down every so often what their needs are down there. At Annunciation, where we were, I would say what we think they need is money for the rent of that great big facility. They have I'd say about 10 Johnnies on the outside that they rent. So that is also an expense. They have, the Salvation Army was wonderful. They're the ones that are providing the food for 3 meals down there. So I guess if you gave to the Salvation Army in Texas, that would help the food. But we are still trying to determine where are the needs and what more needs are, can we help with? So not only Marie, physical assistance by sending people there, flying them or using the van or whatever, but we found that there was need for medicines across the board for babies and that kind of thing. I think that Casa de Refugiado has sufficient, and that's why we've gone searching to other centers to see, well, now who else is in need? And we hear that Laredo is in great need. I don't know, Maureen's on her way down with a van load. So that's sort of where we are with it. We are really still researching and searching out where can our monies be put that will help the immigrant and
If
help
this
them?
problem, the problem is only going to get worse. This is
Correct.
not
We
a
don't think
problem that's
Yeah, we don't think it's
it's-
going to go away.
right,
No,
right. So
no.
if you're feeling particularly ambitious, you can go on Catholic Charities USA website, because there are 5 centers, 3 in Texas, 1 in California, 1 in Arizona, that are just serving unaccompanied minors, and they need like 7,000 volunteers right now. So
There's just
anyway,
lots
and
of
you
these-
don't have to speak Spanish, but
No,
do you
it
want
helps.
to get to questions?
Yeah,
we
it might
don't-
be good to do some
Yes.
Q&A at
Yeah.
this point.
Let's, so there are a couple of questions that are sort of around the same subject, which is the sheer numbers of refugees that are seeking entry into the United States. What are the numbers, if you can, if you have any information about that? And I know that that's a hard thing to get your arms around. And another part of that question is, with climate change, we read that parts of Latin America will become uninhabitable. It'll be just too hot to grow food and to sustain life. Have you all thought about what that's going to do to immigration pressure?
Well, there's already discussion about climate change, and in fact, what they are referring to as climate refugees, because it's not just Central and South America, but the Middle East, Northern Africa, other areas that have had a tendency to generate a lot of refugees already, and in fact have been exacerbated in the last 5 or 10 years. A lot of it is related to climate. If you look at what precipitated what happened in Syria, for instance, a long and very deep drought was really part of what precipitated the crisis that we saw there. So it's not something that's specific to a certain part of the world. It is a massive issue, and one that we as a nation need to tackle, not just in terms of climate change issues and how they're affecting the United States, but how can we in fact assist in being able to further stabilize climate around the world.
I was
Maria,
just
did you wanna add to
looking up.
that?
Well, I was just looking up. I'm trying to get a handle on the number at the border. I want to say, I think maybe, is it 100,000? I say maybe. I could, ladies, I don't know. I don't know, but I mean, it's somewhere in that neighborhood. But the thing you need to remember is our country is 380 million people.
Mhm.
We are 380 million people. So even if it is 100,000, which I don't know if it is or not, that is such a small percentage. It's not like we can't take people in. I don't know,
Well,
some of you on the screen, I'm sure you remember after the Vietnam War and the number of refugees that the country took in. I mean, it was upward of 1 million people
In
that we took in.
1979 alone, we sponsored 121,000 refugees that year, Vietnamese refugees. In total, over 800,000 Vietnamese refugees were
Right,
admitted to the
almost 1
United
million
States.
people.
And you know, I'm reminded the last couple of days as I see the information that's starting to come out from the census about population loss for 20 states, including Missouri. There were more deaths than there were births. And part of this issue in terms of jobs right now that employers appear to be begging people to fill has to do with the fact that we don't have enough workers in the right age brackets to be able to fill all those jobs. And they were traditionally, in at least a few of those cases, those were traditionally jobs that, at least in much of the rest of the country, are filled by immigrants. And so, you know, there is a relationship between our lack of employees in this country and the fact that for 4 years now, the immigration in total, both the visa admissions and what's been happening with refugees and the southern border, the fact that all of that is pretty well dried up during those 4 years that's part of what we're starting to see now.
One of the things that's interesting when we try to put coalitions together statewide to work on these issues, we get a lot of support from staunch Republicans in Southern Missouri. But part of that is because there are 7 poultry plants in Missouri. Purdue, there's 7 of them along the southern border, and they don't have the workers.
Yeah.
And the immigrants are willing to do those jobs that a lot of other people aren't willing to do.
Yeah.
So
Let's move on to another question, which is, should we be giving more aid to the Northern Triangle countries? And if so, what form should that aid take?
You know, absolutely we should be giving more aid. There were, under the Obama administration at least, some attempts to be able to, for instance, put more processing in the Triangle countries so that people weren't having to flee and put their lives in jeopardy trying to get to the southern border. There was some of that was happening toward the end of it, but not enough and not effectively enough. There are some strategies that could be employed that might be able to help us still be able to process people who need to be processed, to admit them to the United States, but not force them to make that 1,000-mile journey to be able to do it. And I would love to see us put some pressure on some people somewhere to be able to make that happen.
I completely agree with Anna. People don't want to leave their homes, and we have to do what we can to make sure they don't feel the need to.
So how can we get the American public behind significant immigration reform? And how can we frame the topic to help people see that reforms would actually be in their self-interest, as Marie pointed out in the case of meat processing plants, poultry processing plants that can't get enough workers? How do we frame it politically?
Oh boy. I read, David Brooks had a really interesting article the other day where what he talked about was that America was such a diverse nation, and we were always this way and that way on every subject, but that when it became a compelling national issue, a national interest issue, America seemed to pull itself together and manage to align. An example was World War II. And he wondered whether it was even possible now to be able to do it because we seem to be so fragmented. And what we have is we have 2 things going on. We have politicians who are deliberately trying to fragment us even more so to be able to form political bases. And then we have cable TV and pundits who are also aiding in that. And one of the things that's different now than maybe back in World War II was that the internet and the ability to be able to instantaneously talk with people around the country and align with them is very different. So I have some question about whether we're going to be successful to be able to develop a coalition, because there are so many people right now that are on the other side. And instead, what we have to do is we have to take that 30% who are behind immigration, and just need the information, and then we have to go to that extra 40% at that point that could perhaps be positive about parts of immigration versus other parts of it, etc. If we just could find the right issue to be able to affect them. And then there's 30% of the population we just have to neutralize in terms of outvoting them and outshouting them, because there's nothing else we're going to be able to do with them. So I'm not very hopeful about the idea that we can have a national coalition of everyone and pull behind this issue, that they'll have a miraculous sort of revelation about it. I think we're just going to have to find our advocates at this point and go with it. And the rest of them will come along screaming, and 40 or 50 years later, like seatbelts, they'll say, oh, well, I guess I mostly have to do it.
Something I think that's really effective is listening to people like Sister Sandy. Just tell stories, just make it personal, make it human, make it, so I'm so grateful, because I know how tired Sister is, but then she agreed to talk this evening. But I hope that you take her stories and you tell your friends and you say, oh, I was on this Zoom and this woman who just got back told me about this dad at the shelter in El Paso who was terrified because his beloved child got captured by the cartel. And now he's terrified as how he's going to pay this $5,000 so he doesn't get killed. Like, it's all personal encounter and humanizing these people. So.
Well, and Maria is absolutely right about the humanization portion of this. And if we want to do anything here in St. Louis, it's to build personal relationships between the immigrants themselves of all backgrounds and people who don't have much experience or normal interaction with them. Because if we can help those individuals become human beings to these other individuals, then there's a chance at least that if they're within that 40%, they may lean in the right direction on these issues.
Sister Sandy, do you want to jump in? Give any last thoughts?
I do like the whole thought about the humanness. I also think that in the St. Louis region, maybe there needs to be some more thought about diversity and the inclusivity issue of people of color throughout all of our culture. I think that we're fearful of people who don't act or look like us. And it's only when you have the kind of experience I just came from or others similar to that, that you begin to say they're human as I'm human. And my grandparents came here and they were able to succeed. And what is giving me this fear to stop others from coming to this wonderful country. We do have to go back, I think, to the commonality that we all share in our human story, and put aside some of our fears. I think that's where I am.
Okay, so it's about 8:30, and that's when we try to wind up to respect people's time. Thank you very much to this fabulous panel. And Ruth, would you like to close for us?
I would be happy to once I'm unmuted. Really, I too just want to thank our speakers so much. I think just from a personal standpoint, I belong to a church that has a large number of immigrants, and I've been able to work in the food pantry during the pandemic and just have met a large number of Asian immigrants from Bhutan and Nepal and Myanmar, and it's a privilege to be able to support those folks, and it is humbling. I think humanizing one another is so very important, and that's what motivates me to try to change the policies to make the lives of these people easier. Yeah. To give them real opportunity. You have increased our knowledge so much, and I hope you've read the comments in the chat box. Certainly, I think you have increased our empathy quotient. So, as overwhelming as this problem is, we don't have the luxury to do nothing. So I'm hoping that our time together here this evening will give people ideas for action and will motivate us to speak out and to act in personal ways and in institutional, societal ways to really make immigration policy just and to make a real policy.
Right.
So people don't wait 25 years to become a citizen. So thank you. Thank you everyone for your time, for spending the evening with us, and be safe and well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.